Catalan Course, game number 5. I'm playing the same opponent that I played in game 4, but in this game, he's 200 points higher rated. And keep in mind, these games are in chronological order. This is a tough opponent. He's gaining very quickly in terms of rating. He plays the Bogo-Indian with c5 again. We're kind of going with a similar structure. And here I grab the big center with pawn to e4. You see these triple pawns on the 4th rank, d6 by my opponent, and e5. So this is that typical idea we talked about. Light square bishop, pawns on dark squares, even including this pawn. Maybe a5 will be played as well. So I castle. I wasn't looking to lock up those pawns immediately because all of those pawns are going to be on the same color as my g2 bishop. One thing I can do here is play pawn to a3. This is actually a really strong decision. If black plays a move like queen to b6, now I can castle. And what's going to happen is I'm going to take on b4 and then bring my knight out. So that b pawn was trying to control important squares that my knight wanted to get to. Now the knight can move out to a3, and I do have a small advantage here out of the opening. So this opponent is a very strong player in the opening. He proved it last game. He had a big advantage. So that was kind of in the back of my mind too, and I think I wanted to just get castled quickly and develop. Knight d7. And now I do find a3. I think my opponent should have played bishop to g4 here. It's also kind of a thematic move. When the pawns are potentially going to be locked up in the center, oftentimes you want to trade off a bishop for knight from the black side. And after bishop g4, if I play a move like f3, that does block in this bishop a little bit. So strategically, it's not the best decision always to put a pawn on f3. My opponent plays knight b to d7, and I do have a small advantage now. 3. We both move our queens, b takes, knight takes. So I kind of get that position I wanted. I have the triple pawns in the center, more space. My pieces are better developed, so look at the 3 minor pieces for white and look at the minor pieces for black. The bishop on c8 is having trouble getting into the game. All of these things combine for a comfortable advantage for the white side. E takes d. So I think that's why my opponent captured here. He felt that my advantage was too big. My moves are natural coming up. Just bring the rooks to the center. He wants to change the nature of the position a little bit. And he's creating these holes that his knight can utilize from d7. And then he can get the c8 bishop out next. So I take on d4, knight c5. And here I make a mistake, but it looks like a natural move. I play rook a to d1. What I should play here is knight to b5. I should jump on this position. There's a weakness on d6. There's also potential weakness on a7. And after bishop to e6, I can take the d6 pawn and then put a rook on d1. This is a great position. And we're also threatening after knight to b5, pawn to b4. And looking at queen takes queen ideas, and the a pawn is pinned to the rook. So that's something that we have to think about. Like let's say rook d8, b4, knight goes back, take, take, knight to c3. This knight is sort of stuck because it's into the rook. This is not a fun position for black either. So rook a d1 was played, knight b5, definite improvement there. My opponent plays rook e8. Now I play f3. I'm trying to play solid, protect this pawn, but I think positionally that wasn't the best idea. Like we talked about, that blocks in this g2 bishop. You really want to avoid blocking in the bishop with too many pawns. f3 gives that bishop a long route back into the game. I think what I should have played here is knight to b5 again, and then rook e1 next. So get the knight to b5, pressure d6, bring the rook in after that. My opponent develops his bishop. Now I finally get knight b5 with the idea of pawn to b4. And this gets me the advantageous queen trade. So one of the big takeaways from this game is how to convert the opening advantage into an endgame advantage. So right now we're kind of in the middle game phase, and that's where we're working on that conversion. How do we get from opening to endgame? Opponent plays knight takes e4. He did not like the other options. So let's say he goes knight back to d7. I have knight takes d6, hitting the rook on e8. And if he trades queens first and moves the rook, now I grab e6, bishop h3, hitting this guy, the knight guards this square, the knight guards this square. Black is in huge trouble here. I'm already plus 1 point, up 1 pawn. This pawn is falling. This pawn's attacked. Everything is in good shape for white. And Stockfish is already saying 8 point advantage. So my opponent sacks a piece. He's trying to play dynamically here. I swap queens, take the piece, and he goes bishop takes c4. So I can kind of see why he did it, right? There's some pressure here. The bishop also eyes the rook. I'm up a piece for 2 pawns, though. That's 1 point of material. Now I just need to figure out how to convert. So I bring the knight back, plays d5, bring my second rook to the center, right? So I want this knight free to be able to capture on e4 if needed. This bishop is eyeing the knight, so I need to bring this over to defend. He takes. I swap rooks and then grab my pawn back. So everything is still defended, but it's a little bit shaky. I have to be careful here that there's no tactics. This is a tricky conversion, that's for sure. So here I put one of the knights on c3. That's a small slip up. If I can find rook to d1, this is by far the cleanest conversion, but this is difficult to see. What's going to happen is if he takes the knight, I can play rook to d4 and keep this pin on the d5 knight. And then I can go round it up on the next move. We keep the extra piece and we keep this crucial b pawn. So the problem is if the b pawn drops in this position, I'm only left with 2 pawns on the board against black's 3 on that same side of the board. You really need a pawn to be able to win this game, because if it just comes down to like rook and knight against rook, that's going to be a draw. Or if you're just up a bishop against a pawn or just a knight against a pawn, that's obviously a draw. So the pawns are important here. I needed to figure out how do I keep that b pawn. But I played here and my opponent recognizes that he can take. And after rook b1, he brings his knight back. I missed the critical chance here, and you probably are already thinking it because we just looked at it. Rook back to d1. Why did I not play rook back to d1, pinning that knight to the rook? So his rook can't move because we have 2 attackers on the d5 knight. If he plays a move like b5, we can take and then hit him with this cool tactic, knight f6 check, and take the take the knight, take the rook, take the rook, and he only has a bishop left, is what I was trying to say. We're up a rook for a couple of pawns. This is completely winning. But I missed it, and I played knight takes d5. And after these exchanges happen, we get more and more into a drawn endgame. My opponent plays really well. I go for the rook trade, which he takes, and I think he recognized I only have 2 pawns on the board. If those pawns get captured, there's nothing I can do. I have to have both bishop and knight remaining to do the bishop and knight checkmate. So we'll fast forward a little bit. Knight d7 check. What happened here was we agreed to a draw, and I tried to recreate the game afterwards. Oh, I think actually it wasn't an agreed draw. This was a time pressure, stop notating draw. But I think it was something like this, and I wasn't able to make progress. And somehow we agreed to a draw. But there was definitely chances to win here. So my opponent played really well. I have to give him credit. He's an extremely tough player. So the takeaways here, move 9. I should play a3, free up this knight. Go for that right away. Move 15. I played f3, and I think that's a positional mistake. I should play knight to b5 here. Go after that d pawn more quickly before black has a chance to get all of his pieces developed. Move number 17, I have a positive takeaway. Pawn to b4. There was a lot of calculation here, but figuring out that this queen trade benefits me, that's a winning endgame, or should be winning endgame, that was huge. You want to find those types of moves to convert your better opening positions into better middle games and better endgames. So 17 b4, positive takeaway, and then last move 24. I kind of try to do 2 positive and 2 negative takeaways each game. Here when I played knight 2 to c3, this is a calculation error. Also kind of an understanding that I really need to make sure not to drop the b pawn. That's going to make the win extremely difficult. Instead of knight 2 to c3, here I should have played rook to d1. All right, so that was game number 5. I will see you guys for game number 6.